Today, the 4th of June, 2021. We've got a full agenda as always. And I just wanted to share a quick slide with you if I could to start with. Somebody will need to give me permission, it looks like. No, not coming through.
Okay, you should have it now.
There we go. Just throw this on. Just a quick quote from Gandhi. The true measure of any society can be found in how it treats its most vulnerable members. And I think important for us to remember as we look after kids in general, and then specifically some of the kids who have special needs and different things that they need to work through in order to get the education that they need. We will, with that, we'll go ahead and start. I believe we have some public comment today. Maybe Patty and Nora Lee, could you help us with that? We'll welcome those who are here to give public comment and hear from you first.
Yes, thank you, Chair Hansen. We're going to go ahead and Nora Lee, queue up our first person, reminding them that they have 2 minutes to speak.
Yes, the first person that will be speaking today is Sue Pollard. Sue, each of you will be given 2 minutes for your comments. At the 2-minute mark, I will let you know time is up, and then the next person on deck will be Steve Phelps. And with that, Sue, if you're available, the time is yours.
I am. Thank you. Thank you for having me speak on behalf of parents and citizens against critical race theory. As a parent, when my child attends school, I expect a few things. I expect my child to get an education to prepare him for college and success in the real world. I expect him to be safe, and I expect him to be able to have diversity of thought. What I do not expect is an undertone in our curricula that he is to be judged by the color of his skin. So I'm here to ask you to stop CRT in our schools now. It is alive and well throughout Utah. Just last week, Harris Simmons, the chair of the UBHE, actually wrote an op-ed in the Tribune, excited to tell of the equity lens framework to be used in all colleges and universities in Utah, but also to expand to 55 of our high schools in the upcoming 21-22 school year. Harris said he wants, quote, equity-focused framework with critical race theory as cornerstone. As the cornerstone. You can read it and it does define race, but more importantly, it uses Kendi as its cornerstone. Why use the abhorrent thoughts of Kendi that you fight racism with more racism, fight discrimination with more discrimination? Two wrongs do not make a right. CRT is not about stopping racism, it's about power. CRT is a perversion of the truth. CRT's intolerance becomes normalized along with the idea of systemic racism, weakening the public and private bonds that create trust and allow for civic engagement. This is Marxism under the guise of equity. You don't gain equity by forcing victimhood on Black children. Imposing CRT onto Black children doesn't make them any less poor or make them smart. It does nothing to raise them up to be successful. CRT focuses on tearing down whites, imposing guilt, making them atone for the original sin of having white skin. Interestingly, CRT does not ask anything of those they claim are oppressed. It's all about the oppressors pandering to political, social, and radical causes. This is about our schools vying for the social approval, all in the name of social justice. We are on the precipice of a very dangerous social construct. You are in fact intending to radically segregate our children. Children should not have to spend their days considering how racial bias can be found in every lesson. Instead, let us teach them respect, honesty, and above all, let's get back to teaching our children academics. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Okay, next on deck is Steve Phelps.
Thank you, board members. We at USEEP are ecstatic for the recent support the board has given to students with disabilities. I'm the president-elect of the USEEP panel. When the inclusive practice memo was turned into a motion by Cindy Davis and passed unanimously out of committee, I cried. As I watched yesterday, I saw board member Booth get emotional discussing his amendment to the equity rule, which specifically pointed to my son. I cheered when I heard board member Cannon discuss her own grandson with Down syndrome and how it matters that our educational policies recognize our kids. I've been equally dismayed by some board members' comments around students with disabilities. General policy from the board to the classroom often fails to address students with special needs. Inclusion is not about having the same. Inclusion for students with disabilities is about creating a safe space flexible enough to allow students with disabilities to thrive. Inclusion matters. We know when it's done correctly, it works to improve academic performance. But inclusion represents much more. It represents acceptance, access, and more importantly, a bright future for our children. Inclusion enriches the lives of education of all students. Students and educators build compassion and empathy in inclusive settings. It gives our students opportunity to navigate in a traditional setting. Inclusion destroys myths about individuals with disabilities and honest experiences. As both a general education and a special education teacher, I have a unique perspective. When I was teaching general education, other general education teachers wanted help in improving the practices of inclusion. As a SPED teacher, I see the impact of policy on furthering exclusion. A larger portion of our local LEAs are cut and paste from the IDEA. We hold the IDEA in such a high regard that we often ignore the reality. The IDEA is still mostly a law passed in 1975, and it's often vague. It should be the foundation to which Utah's system is built upon and not the system itself. My children deserve a system that honors him and not a 55-year-old law that's in need of an update. USEEP is asking the USB today to support inclusion through a statewide initiative which addresses the unique needs of all stakeholders. Washington State has launched a similar initiative and with high levels of success. In the Inclusive Practice Project is designed to allow the state and each LEA to develop a plan, based in the needs analysis. We are asking today that we invest in the meaningful inclusion because it requires the investment to propel it forward. We've made a lot of commitments over the last little while, and we just want to make sure that we're giving LEAs the services and the supports to help drive that forward. Thank you.
And that concludes public speakers for today. Chair Hansen.
Thank you, Norley. Appreciate that. And appreciate both of our speakers today for taking the time and having the interest in the education of our kids. We appreciate you being here. Thank you. We will now ask Deputy Superintendent Norman if she can help us with the staff recognition portion of our meeting.
I can. Thank you, Chair Hansen. This is always my favorite part because it really speaks to the hard work that staff has been doing. I'm going to try and do it a little bit differently this time. Usually I read through the recommendations and the commendations, and then we have staff raise their hand and wave. And this time we're going to try and see if the staff members that are on that this is about can show their screen first so that our board members can see your faces as it's being read. So the staff we're recognizing for this first item is David McKay, Wynn Shooter, Callista Glenn, Lindsay Janes, Malia McElvina, Albert Tay, Melissa Holt, and Aaron Bruff. So we'll start out by saying the Utah State Board of Education is committed to the vision of upon completion, all Utah students are prepared to succeed and lead by having the knowledge and skills to learn, engage civically, and lead meaningful lives. So in order to do this and to accomplish these goals, staff of the board are engaged in supporting the everyday work to achieve this goal and assisting the board to create equitable conditions for student success, advocating for necessary resources, developing policy, and providing effective oversight and support. This month, we're going to be highlighting two that deserve this recognition. And am I seeing the staff members who are on with their cameras on so that we can wave to those board members and they can see who you are. And this first one is the data and statistics staff, and they've established themselves as a key collaborative team for the State Board of Education. Their expertise and professionalism on all things related to data quality, data science methodology, and analytics has lifted the overall quality of the work that the State Board undertakes. And one area, and this is only one of the areas the data and statistics team has been leading out on, is the development and upgrading of an interactive reporting dashboard. One example of this can be seen in the update of the COVID-19 federal relief funding dashboard. And the request to update was given to the team. And in under a week, they added additional funding sources from the grants management system and updated the dashboard with the newly required items. The visualization are created to assist the work of agency departments and the field. And there's a link that's included, and I'm just going to share that really quick. And I think that the beauty of this is the fact that 85% of people, especially in the age of technology, have been shown to now be let me share hold on really quick, have been shown to be digital learners. And can you see the screen that I'm sharing? No?
Yes, we can see
Yes.
the shared screen.
Okay, good. And as I click on it, it really speaks to the fiscal responsibility and really being that fiduciary agent and saying, here's what the funds are per each LEA and what it means, what the awarded amounts are, their total payments and remaining amount. And just really quickly, visually, we can see what that looks like, and it is up to date. And so that's a lot of hard work, even though it makes it look so simple. And if it looks really simple, that actually speaks to the talent of the staff by having the user be able to just really work through it so quickly. So first of all, thank you to all of those who are being recognized for this work. Next, we have on there it speaks to the recognition. So that first one kind of spoke to what's happening within, and now this speaks to that really intense collaboration that we have outside of the agency as well. And this one will be working Dr. Christelle Estrada. And if you're on, Dr. Estrada, if you can turn on your camera. And this reflects USB developing the capacity for LEAs to ensure quality learning and evidence-based programs for students learning English at the local level. This recognition speaks to the collaboration with outside stakeholders to make amazing opportunities available. The English as a Second Language competency-based endorsement proposal was approved by USBE leadership in November of 2017 as a pilot project. And USBE collaborated with University of Utah staff for a year-long professional learning for teachers to accomplish the goal. The design consisted of quarterly face-to-face meetings, personalized individual meetings, and online webinars with 25 teachers from Salt Lake, Granite, Davis, Cache, Box Elder, Monticello Academy, and a team from Utah International Charter Schools. 11 teachers completed the experience with a final presentation based on individual goals from the competency-based rubrics established by the Commission for the Accreditation of Educator Preparation. All approved ESL endorsement programs in Utah universities and colleges are based on performance standards of teaching English to speakers of other languages. Competency-based programs are USBE approved at Monticello Academy since 2018, in Provo since 2019, and in Wasatch this year. And Tooele is developing their approach with support from other LEAs and the USBE technical assistance. Resources and LEA-specific models are being shared across the state. There is no cost, and LEA instructional coaches with content specialists and administrators provide support that is aligned with all LEA content departments. There have been 3 outcomes worth celebrating. First, demonstrated competency through an individual or group, so that's the grade level of vertical team. Evidence-based electronic portfolio based of the K-12 competency rubric of the TESOL standards with teacher self-assessment and goal setting for professional growth. Second, individuals present a portfolio exhibition protocol at their LEA with a local panel, including a school administrator, designated district representative, preferably the alternative language services specialist or the federal programs coordinator, and the same grade level teacher peer. Third, we have a list of LEA educators who have been approved by the local panel, submitted to USBE licensing section, and approved by the USBE Title III specialist. So Dr. Estrada, I know that having you on here and wave to the board, they see one person, but you represent many who have collaborated on this. So a big thank you to the work that staff has done both inside and outside of the agency to include all stakeholders moving forward.
Back to my mic. Thank you, Patty, and thank you, staff. Just amazing work again in the middle of some really tough conditions this last year. I popped the link on that interactive chart and got lost in it for half an hour last night. It's a lot of information, and as long as I know what my districts look like, I could find everything very quickly. So really appreciate all the work that's gone on behind the scenes, and thank you for being here with us today. We are going to move forward to our first item. That one is an information item, and we are on 3.2. That's the P-12 English Language Arts Standards Revision Update. And we will ask, looks like we have Naomi and Julie here with us. Is that right?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. Please help us understand where we are with ELA.
I'd love to. So good afternoon. Naomi Watkins, Secondary English Language Arts Specialist. And I'm here to give an update on the preschool to through grade 12 English language arts standards revision. And we're still plugging and chugging away. Definitely a heavy lift. We are meeting in our 3 strands, reading, writing, and speaking and listening. And I have to say, having very thoughtful conversations about language, the language that we're using, and making sure that it is the same across not only the grade levels, but across different content areas to provide continuity and also increased emphasis on those areas. So happy to answer any questions, but yeah.
Committee members, do we have any questions regarding the progress on the standards? Janet, please.
Thank you. I would just like you to tell me what you are doing to address grammar throughout the P12 English core, and where and how intensively is grammar being taught?
So we had a meeting. Oh, sorry, can I answer that question, Chair?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Go ahead.
We had a meeting as a whole committee right after we submitted this memo, where we talked as a group about the language and where it would fit across those 3 strands. So I don't have specifics for you yet, Board Member Cannon, but we did have a very intensive conversation about what level of explicitness we wanted the grammar standards to be. And then as we came to a consensus about the level of specificity, which we decided depended on grade level and context, then they are working in their small groups to discuss how those different standards apply in reading or in writing or in speaking and listening. Because while there might be the same, like we might be focusing on periods, for example, how that plays out obviously is different in speaking and listening than it is if I'm using them in my writing.
Well, I must say, I'm glad you're not leaving it out, because I feel like my children who graduated some time ago did not get anywhere near the amount of training in English grammar that they needed. And they now call their mother the grammar police as a result. So hopefully you folks will do enough to beef up the grammar core, that our kids will be graduating with a good basis of grammar of English. It also helps them in foreign languages too.
Thanks, Janet. Looks like we've got a couple more hands. Committee member Straight, please. And then Laura, you're next. Go ahead, Brent. Oh, Brent. Board member Straight. Hello. It's not me that's frozen, is it? I think
it's him.
Brent. Okay, we're going to move to Laura and see if we get Brent back.
Thank you, Chair. The question I have is that, are we doing a complete overhaul, or is this some cleanup and updating?
Who's best to field that question? Naomi?
Yeah, I can answer that. It depends. So for example, they're totally adding and beefing up more phonological awareness in grades 2 through 3. But they're really, I would say it's more of a revision than a complete overhaul. It's taking the existing standards and having thoughtful conversations about what does the standard mean? Does it align to the anchor standards that are there? And it's interesting that we're finding that even amongst us, we have different understandings of the old or the current standards. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. Looks like Jennifer, did you have something to?
Yeah, if you don't mind me adding. So Jennifer Thronson, Director of Teaching and Learning, and just to address Board Member Belknap's question, we are looking at reducing the number of standards. That has been the #1 feedback from the field, is that there's just too many standards. So in any particular grade level, there might be 80 ELA standards, and that is a lot for a teacher to try and get at high levels of proficiency for students. And so that is one of the major charges. So although it may not be called an overhaul, it will be a reduction in the number of standards that you would expect to see coming out of this committee compared to what we've had over the past about a decade.
As long as you don't cut out any grammar, I think we'll be okay. Jenny, did you have a question?
I did. And maybe we've asked this before, and if so, I apologize. Are we using any outside entities as far as their structural use of standards to base our standards on? Or are we just comparing it to what's in Utah standards and then implementing additional clarification or simplifying?
Who's got their hand up on that one? Are we back to you, Naomi?
I can answer that question.
Okay, please.
We have not been consulting other state standards. So it really is about their expertise, their experience. And then, so that's really what we've been focusing on.
Okay, it's kind of like a Christmas present, isn't it? Meaning there's this big box wrapped out there somewhere and we're anxious to see what's inside the box at some time. So
I am too.
So anyways, thank you for all your work.
And it looks like we have Brent back with us. Did you have a question, Brent?
Yeah, wow, I was so stressed out over by that discussion of grammar, it knocked my power out. So I called in on my phone. But anyway, I kind of missed the last several comments, I think, but I did have a question.
We're never going to get to Brent's question. Oh, okay. We'll,
It's moving.
Okay, Brent, you're going to have to rewind. You cut off in the middle of this again. So this is like a cliffhanger. Need to hear your question.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
I apologize. So I'll be quicker to it. It used to be that there were options to where you had a history class, an art class, an English class, all in one course. Are those days long gone, or is that something that's in the works again, or is there any status on that?
Okay, there's someone that can field the question?
I will do my best, and if Naomi wants to correct me if I get anything. So that would typically have been described like as a humanities class where they were combining arts, social studies, and ELA. Those are still permitted in terms of they blend the appropriate English language arts standards with the social studies content they want to teach and the arts. And so they would get that humanities credit, which could be an elective ELA credit or an elective credit in one of the other content areas. So those are still there, but they lean on the core standards to create those elective courses.
Okay, so really it's not a matter of the state, it's a matter of whether a school is willing to take that on and has the resources and teachers to do that. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's nothing that prevents it. As a state, we require English 9, 10, and 11 with inclusion of like AP and CE in those options. And then grade 12 has more flexibility, but the state does require English 9, English 10, English 11, which are what the core standards would be. But if a school wants to provide a humanities type class that's more of an integrated model, that is still, it's allowable.
So has there ever been discussion about allowing college coursework in 11th grade and not having to take their 11th grade English course?
So they can take like a concurrent enrollment English for 11th grade or AP English for that. Those ones are allowable.
So that's all covered. It seems like
I hope so. You might find something not.
So it just seems like sometimes, because I've had people call me and I didn't know the answer. And it seems like there's more flexibility than people know about in parents and that, because that has been a question from several parents wanting to have a little more flexibility with that. So thank you for that, and I'll be able to answer their question better next time.
Thank you. I know the content of the standards is certainly exciting to see. I don't know if there have been any earth-shattering changes in ELA over the last few years, but it's always exciting to see, what we take out and what we add and how we twist that. But I'm also excited to see the core standards starting to come together so they look the same format, and you can go from one standard to another and not get lost. I think in the past, it seems to me, and I don't have that much experience, but they were done more independently, and it seems like we're coming together so it looks a lot more cohesive. I think that's got to be good for the schools to be able to look at it and understand it maybe better. So thank you for all the work, and we're excited to get the next episode of your updates. Oh, Janet, you've got your hand up again, your real hand.
Well, I just thought of something as you were speaking, and I wanted to get a quick answer from Jennifer. So we've set up a new rubric to show us when standards should be redone, and we've gone through all this process. How long has it been since English Language Arts standards have been revised?
So English Language Arts was 2013 was the last revision. We had like the first edition of what is the core ELA was 2010. In 2013, we added handwriting in K through 5. That was kind of the revision. It was a light revision in 2013. This will be that more significant revision cycle. It'll have been truly a decade other than the handwriting standards that we added.
So it has been a while. Thank you very much.
Look at that, Janet, you sparked another question. Jenny.
Oh.
Yeah, that did spark a question with me. Are we, and is this we've kind of answered this already, but I know that this is a little bit anxious for educators and others, administrators to revamp every element of it, but it sounds like we're kind of solidifying or combining things. Is that right? So that it's not like, we got to tell you all, we got to do all this professional development, professional learning on all this new stuff. I just feel like it seems like we get caught up on one thing and then we have two more in the lineup to do. Does that make sense? Just the busyness for the local schools now we have to pick up one more thing instead of just adding or amplifying what we're already doing.
Yeah, Chair, may I respond to that?
Sure, thanks.
I think the prime example is right after this, you have the social studies standards for elementary. And so we have social studies and ELA that are likely to queue out into the field at a very similar time. And as an elementary teacher, I'm responsible for both, right? And so keeping that in mind with us, with ELA, I think what you'll see is a more consolidation of focused efforts on what we had before, but we had a really large breadth and really getting down to the essentials so that our teachers can focus their energies. There'll be a little addition to 2-3 in terms of the research over the last few years has shown that phonological awareness needs to continue into grades 2 and 3. That will be new for 2nd and 3rd grade teachers. But that, as far as I've seen, and Naomi can speak more to this and heard about, there's not anything like shiny and new that our teachers are going to have to receive a lot of professional learning around outside of that kind of 2-3 phonological awareness space.
Does that answer the question then, Jenny? Thank you. Anything else on this one? We appreciate the update, both the backup and being able to talk with you. I think that helps us to understand what's going on. So thanks for being here and thanks for the information. We will, Jennifer gave us the teaser. We're moving into social studies now. So let's go to 3.3, I believe it is. Oop, I can get on here. And it looks like we have Robert here with us, and I saw him earlier on the stream. So Robert, do you want to help us understand where we are? There he is.
Great.
Help us understand where we are with social studies.
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Chair Hanson. Robert Austin, K-12 Social Studies Specialist, State Board of Education. We are trying to race against English so we can get out ahead of English a little bit. So we have a little moment of a spotlight because we do know that the challenge really for an elementary teacher is trying to figure out how they address all of the competing demands on their lives. And so the elementary standards team has been working this year in the midst of the pandemic and has been incredible. what we've really focused on is, again, honing down to what's essential. And when the standards, even the conversation beginning regarding standards revision, the emphasis even from the get-go was to get really clear, to think about what's essential, to think about how we can make sure things are accessible, so that teachers can really use standards as a tool for standards-based and proficiency grading, and that the possibilities of integration are magnified as often as possible, so that people can see that social studies, science, fine arts, language arts, health can in many ways intersect in some really meaningful and powerful ways for kids. But we don't want to lose sight of how important social studies is. We believe that social studies and the background knowledge that is essential in learning about the world really helps with student achievement. And we've seen that in studies that really articulate how important background knowledge and just understanding systems, really just how important that is. So we are looking at the fall in August, being able to bring the full standards to you in the August meeting, and then roll those out to get a good, really systematic public comment and board comment and move forward.
Thank you, Robert. And this one, just so I understand, so the ELA was K through 12, but this one we're pre-K, excuse me, P through 12, but here we're P through 6, is that right?
Yes, P6. So the 7-12 standards were approved a few years ago. And again, these elementary standards actually have not been fully revised in 15 years. So we do have some good work and some good clarity to provide in terms of moving from a standard. For example, we've had standards before that would say something like, students will understand the importance of the Constitution, for example. Well, assessing that is pretty hard. I mean, you're going to walk around the classroom and say, so do you understand the importance of the Constitution? And just have students nod back and forth. It's like, that's not a good way to assess it. But if we can have students instead make a claim or craft an argument for why they think, what are some of the most essential elements of the Constitution and the rule of law, and how transformative is that? Those are the kinds of things that we're hoping to see and we're working on in these new standards. So excited about that. I did make a point in the memo that I gave to you to just even talk about how we want to build these habits of thought early on. And even kindergartners are able to do the kinds of work that historians do, which is to look at artifacts and retell the story of a history based on the evidence. And that's exactly what historians do on a regular basis. And it's wonderful to get them off on the right foot in the early grades, even if it's merely sorting photographs and retelling verbally versus writing it, just depending on where the students are in those early grades.
Thank you. I can feel the excitement. It seems like it's been 15 years, seems like a long time, especially for social studies. We've got a couple of hands up, and I will go to Brent and then Jenny and then Janet. So please go ahead, Brent.
Thank you. Mr. Austin, I noticed in the opening memo that you had a different title on that page. It was Humanities, I think, was it Team something?
May I answer that, Chair?
Yeah.
Oh, yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, I forget that sometimes. I was the K-12 social studies specialist for a long time, and I was recently given the opportunity to become the humanities team coordinator. So that's really my real title, and I appreciate the clarification.
Well, no, I actually find it significant in my mind because it suggests something that goes back to my question with ELA, and that is that to what degree are we integrating across the curriculum in regards to this? Because even though I am a history teacher and it breaks my heart, that's the first thing that goes in the elementary, especially when they're preparing for their final assessments. And yet, we're talking about how important it is. So I think that element, I just think that the title that you have really speaks to my mind about reaching across the curriculum, inserting those primary source documents. You mentioned artifacts, but there's photographs, there's art, there's speeches, there's letters, there's all sorts of things to where we can integrate social studies into their language arts instruction. We can integrate science into their language arts instruction. However, I think we need to heavy load it to the social studies, since that tends to be the first thing to go. So my question is, what efforts are being made to make certain that we get integrated across the curriculum in a humanities sort of way?
Please. Yeah.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. And I would really like to recruit you for professional learning across the state to proselytize about the importance of integrating these ideas. I mean, but the reality is—
I'll be there whenever you want.
Thank you. You know, I mean, you do point to a real concern that we have across the nation, and definitely in Utah, which is the marginalization of social studies, the kind of really narrowing of the curriculum in some ways in the early grades. And so my writers have been looking at every standard and thinking about what are the possibilities for integration? What are the ways that these standards can reinforce reading, writing, speaking, and listening? What are the ways that we can find fine arts extensions? And then we're really going to have to work to provide those examples and to collaborate with parents and with school districts to really provide some models so teachers can see how it is possible to weave that really kind of a rich tapestry throughout the day of these kind of really compelling ways that kids actually learn. They don't learn in little silos of an ELA block and then a science block, and then there's so many ramifications in science that have social studies implications. There are so many opportunities in a reading block to focus on social studies or science or fine arts topics that really do succeed in both the most efficacious use of time in the classroom, but also really beyond that, making the learning stick. And that's what we need and want. So we are definitely committed to continuing that work, and not only just saying it, but also thinking about what are the resources that teachers are going to need. I put money in my budget for the implementation of the standards to make sure that we've got professional learning for teachers. And then we really have to kind of put some, I hope some gentle inspiration on the parts of LEAs to also step up and provide what they can in terms of really robust integration across the disciplines.
Thank you. Jenny, I think you're up next. We'll go to you.
Yeah, thank you. I just have a request when we end up getting the full version or full vision. And that request is if you can just provide a crosswalk to the civics and character education laws, so that as we're looking at those standards, we're able to cross-reference it from the laws in the state of Utah. And I know you know what those are. Those are in the 53G10, 302, 304, 204, and then the economic one is in 53E. But if you could just a crosswalk so that we are able to easily, because that's what I'm going to do anyways, right? So anyways, so that, well, maybe it's making my life easier, but I just think then it's easier just to coordinate that so we can see the implementation there. So.
Yeah, I'd imagine, and maybe Robert can confirm, that's probably part of the way you're doing your work already, because those are essential parts of the core. So hopefully we can be able to see that and make it more visual. Thanks, Jenny. I think that's a great suggestion. Janet, we'll move to you.
Thank you. Robert, I just was impressed reading your paragraph on standards being accessible, and your sentence here to support efforts at standards-based grading and competency-based learning. So are these two elements of the standards that have not been present in previous standards? And I'm wondering if that could be addressed. And then I have a little second question in the back of my mind that's, do you believe our kids would be better off if we had some kind of assessments, statewide assessments for social studies?
Okay, Robert, I'm going to put you on hold for just a second because Jennifer had her hand up and it probably deals with the last question. So I'll give you a minute to think. Please go ahead, Jennifer.
Robert is so good on the fly. He doesn't need that minute, but thank you, Chair Hansen. So I wanted just to get back to Board Member Straight's question around integration. It's something we've actually been speaking with our curriculum directors about, knowing that the disadvantaging of social studies and science in our classrooms in elementary is to detriment of students in terms of they need that well-rounded education and that broad scope of content. And so we've been meeting with the curriculum directors, asking them, like, what are the barriers? What are the supports you need to be able to move this work forward? And so gathering that information, then our team is going to start addressing those needs this coming year. We've got some budget set aside to help with that, to really start advancing what does integration look like? Where are those natural touch points in the standards? And with ELA and social studies coming out together, I know Robert and I had discussed the opportunity to have that crosswalk of integration where some of those really natural partnerships between the standards can arise, so that to help teachers to see those opportunities for integration. So it's definitely in our kind of current focus, and you'll see some work coming out of us next year in science, health, PE, the arts, and social studies in terms of helping elementary teachers who have the best opportunity to integrate, to see those opportunities through the standards with resources and tools to help them to do that work. So know that we're with you on this passion, and the field is kind of calling for support in this space to really help teachers, knowing we have limited time in elementary, but we do feel this need to provide a more comprehensive education, that these types of opportunities will help with that.
Thank you. And that really is kind of a good segue to the question on testing in particular. Sometimes we prioritize what we're tested on, and so that might play into that. But please go ahead, Robert, and we'll get back to Janet's question now.
Great, thank you, Chair. So, Board Member Cannon, your first question regarding the both either standards-based grading or proficiency-based grading. For us in these standards, it really is getting some clarity so that a standard will articulate exactly what we would expect a student to be able to do and know. And that hadn't been as clear in, and isn't as clear in the original standards that we're currently using right now, because we do use kind of a lot of nebulous language like students will understand. And it's getting to what's the demonstration of that proficiency. I mean, we have a really beautiful, I think, specific definition of standards in this state that talk about not just knowledge, but that a demonstration of that knowledge, and that demonstrated proficiency then means that a teacher and parent and student should know exactly what is expected of them. And so that's what we're really looking at. We're trying to make sure that there aren't any guesses. We don't want teachers to guess, oh, what the heck did they mean by that? I mean, one of the things we're going to do in the 90 days of public comment is make sure that the standards are really clear. If it's not clear, and teachers and parents don't understand what's expected of the students, then we have to make sure that that gets either revised or is taken out. And so that's the piece. One of the things that really drives us is this concept of understanding by design. It's not a new concept. It's been around for, well over a quarter century. But the idea of what's the end goal, and then how do we get there? And beginning with that end assessment is a really powerful way to get clarity. On the second piece, that we've been talking about and wondering about state assessment in social studies for a long time, for as many years as I've been at the state, and that will be 15 years soon. And the conversation years ago was, do we want to put one more assessment on students first and elementary teachers in those early grades? And then the second part is that the challenge of an assessment that's affordable can very often be the lowest common denominator kind of social studies instruction. You know, the multiple choice kind of basic recall. And that is not the kind of learning we want to reinforce. So if we can find a way to do some assessments that really push the kinds of learning we want and aren't an undue burden, then I'm sure teachers would be all for that. But that's a tough road to climb.
Thank you, Robert. We'll go to Brent and then to Laura.
I'll let Laura go first.
Okay. Laura, go ahead.
Well, thank you. Thinking about assessments, and especially in our lower grades, I really love the concept, Robert, of competency-based and also demonstrating. And we kind of switched in our school, and we do a lot of project-based learning. Do we have any movement towards that rather than an assessment?
Robert, please.
Yeah, thank you, Board Member Belknap. The question, part of this gets to the challenge of standards versus curriculum. So there may be lots of ways that a teacher will approach a specific standard. And many of those could be incredible, wonderful projects that could take an extended period of time. Another teacher, using their best professional judgment, might go in a different way in terms of the kinds of ways they're going to assess a student's competency. But certainly the kinds of projects and the kinds of real demonstrations of proficiency that students can be proud of, that they could showcase, those are some really great opportunities that I think we could really spotlight and celebrate and replicate. And there are many elementaries that do things like Project Citizen, which is a civics program where students identify an issue in their classroom. Maybe they want a safer route to school, or they feel like the speed limit is too high in a neighborhood, and they find out how they can make that change and who they would need to talk to, and then they articulate that whole process. And what that does is it exemplifies perhaps a standard that is really having students identify who are their local representatives and what roles do they play. And so there are so many really fantastic ways for teachers to think creatively about meeting the standards, but it's kind of the difference between a standard and then what the teacher does to make that happen.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you. Okay, Jennifer, did you have something on this subject?
Yeah, I think the opportunity that's ahead of us actually starts next week is the P20 Competency development rubrics of really helping people to see the opportunity of how we integrate standards, skills, and dispositions of our students into these learning and experiences such as a project-based learning, really trying to take opportunities to weave knowledge, skills, and kind of those attitudes and beliefs of students into the work of school. And that will be coming out. I know we have 2 weeks of work in June on that, and I think it's coming to the board in August to kind of show what comes out of that work. But that's an opportunity, I think, that gets at Board Member Belknap's, like, is there more opportunities coming in this space of projects and really thinking about how we integrate content together to have students demonstrate their competence. And those P20 experiences, if we do them well, will be an opportunity for us to kind of weave standards with the actual information of like teamwork and collaboration and communication that are some of those skills on our Portrait of a Graduate. So that opportunity is coming as well, that I think we'll start to see a stronger move in that direction.
Thank you. I think that was a good add. Seems like all of this is just going in the direction of competency-based learning and micro-credentialing and trying to figure out how we can, the individualized learning that we're talking about a lot. So we see this big wave, and social studies is certainly moving along with it. Back to you, Board Member Strait. You still got your hand up there.
Yes, I hope I can pull all of this together because I have a million things going on in my head right now. And so let's give that a try. So when I went for my master's, I actually did my master's project on authentic assessment in the social studies, and did lots of work and research around that. About 4 years ago, I took an entire school year with one concept, and that was to build student efficacy. And I did a PLC with a teacher that didn't teach US history, but taught world history. And we PLC'd on the idea of well, what does this look like? And each quarter we adjusted and we reworked that. 2 years ago, we tried to combine that with competency-based learning. We didn't call it competency-based, we called it proficiency-based. And so we did our assessments along there. We cut out all extra credit. Teaching, learning, and assignments were not, they were used to monitor and give suggestions, feedback, but they weren't used for grading. What happened was, here's the standard, here's what you need to accomplish. We can move on after you complete the standard. If you don't get it the first time, then we'll back up and we'll bring you up to it. The reason I'm bringing all this up is that when it comes to testing, there's a part of me that has always wanted to prove what my students could do. And then there's a part of me that says, well, how do you do that in this course where we have so many different things going on and so much is skill-based. But, you know, one thing is, if I were back in the classroom again, and if I were to teach, for example, a government class, I think we do a really good job of the government side, but I'm not sure we do a good job of the civic side. Because civics is about action. It's about what we do. It's about our integration into the community and into our school and with our friends and everything else. And so, and I know one of the things that I would work on is civics engagement. And I think Mr. Austin brought up a very, very good point when he talked about, well, you want to see this happen, or you want to see this happen in your community. What's the process for having that occur? I do know that Mr. Austin and myself will be on a group this summer with Representative Snow to look at civics engagement, civics education. And here's where I've come down as I've reviewed Portrait of a Graduate. It appears to me that is where we get our framework for the civics side of our children's education. And maybe I'm off base there, but it seems to me that would be the anchor to moving forward with our curriculum in that regard, because there is a big push from the legislature. They want to have more in line with civics, as well as not just civics, but government. Right now, it's a half-year course. I think our teachers do a wonderful job with what they have. I think the standards, the strands, I think those strands are excellent. I've reviewed them multiple times, and I think we're in a good place as far as the curriculum goes. But how do we get that civic engagement? I know I've said a lot. I apologize, but I'm getting a few things off my chest there.
Thank you, Brent. We'll go to Jenny, and then we'll think about wrapping this one up and moving forward after that. But please, Jenny.
Yeah, and I think, and I've mentioned this before, but I think there has to be foundational knowledge before there can be application. And so I think that's a key thing, especially in our basic grades, is that foundational knowledge so that there is an application point. Just asking for evidence is one thing, but being able to concretely understand something is another, or, you know, having a concrete understanding of something. Anyways, so I hope that's taken into consideration too. So just being active civically doesn't mean necessarily that it's producing, I don't know, a constitutional republic, so to speak. It may be just an action out there. So it has to be based on some kind of a principled direction or understanding. So those are just a couple of thoughts I had.
Thank you. And it will certainly be interesting to see how this steps us forward through all the grades to, and what is integrated at each grade level. Robert, did you have any final response to any of the questions that we have? Or are we okay? No. Robert, we good?
His screen is frozen.
Looks like he's frozen now. We're having some issues, aren't
At
we
least
today?
he froze in a good position. Let's stay.
Yeah. Very statesman-like there, I think. It's a good post. We'll go ahead then and move to the next item that we have, and this one is an action item. We are on, let me see. This is 3.4, Alternative Achievement Standards Review Process for Students with Significant Cognitive Disabilities. And we're talking about the standards review process there. And I think we have, Leah, are you there? Or is that Tanya? Are you going to take the helm on this one?
You bet.
I
Thank
am
you, Chair.
Chair, but Tanya's going to take the lead.
Okay, sounds good. I see both of you now. Please go ahead, Tanya.
Thank you, committee. Good afternoon. My name is Tanya Semerad, and I am the Autism and Significant Cognitive Disabilities Specialist. So with all this standards talk, I fit right in. So as you probably all know, we've been before you regarding this topic many times. Our students with significant cognitive disabilities, so we're talking about that 1% of our students who are significantly impacted in terms of their cognitive abilities and their adaptive abilities. We are required to provide them alternate achievement standards that align directly with our core standards. And so we have come before you several times as the core standards are revised, and we have to go in and make sure that we align directly with those standards and reduce them in what we say breadth, depth, and complexity for this population of students. Last time we met a few months ago regarding aligning with our science standards that were recently updated, it was recommended by this committee that we propose a draft that would kind of mirror the standards process but take out some of the steps. And the reason that we're proposing taking out some of the steps is because we are directly aligning with those standards that already went through the steps. However, we do feel strongly and agree with the board at this point that we still want a process there for you all to look at the standards that have been written by a committee of stakeholders. We do very similar work as our committees, our stakeholder groups that write the core standards, where we bring in teachers, LEAs across the state to help reduce those standards. And then we want you to look at them, and we also want to put them out there for public review and comment, and then bring them back. So just to wrap it up for you, I have a draft here, and thanks to Leah, she helped, as well as some other people at USBE, to take out a few of the steps, but also I feel like really honor the process that we want to make sure and go through to get that out for public review. So that's what we have before you. We're hoping that you will recommend this draft for full board.
Thank you, Tanya. And maybe I can just ask a question right off the bat. So from my understanding from our conversations before, we're kind of tapping into the standards review process 6 months in or something. Is that right? How
yes,
much?
and sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that's okay. I just wondered if that's the case, how much time are we taking with this process compared to the full process? That's the first question.
Sure. I actually put up a comparison graphic, or oh, wow, that was fast. Thank you. It's really the main changes in the first 6 steps. So if you were to look at the core standards review process, it's not until step 6 that they're bringing the committee to write. Okay, but for us, and I've highlighted that there, but for us, we're bringing them in step 3 to write, because the first 6 steps of the core is really deciding if there even needs to be standards revision. And we know we legally have to do standards revision, and then deciding, bringing that out to the public and deciding what that's going to look like. We are required to do that. So it takes out some steps. The only other thing I'm going to say, Chair Hansen, is that rather than the 90 day out for public review, we've reduced it to 45 days. I believe it takes it down from an 18-month process, which is the full review, to a 12-month process, which would be our process.
Thank you. And I imagine maybe you can comment on what's happened before, but you've probably got a dedicated group of parents and professionals who are very interested in this and involved. Is that the case? Do we have a lot of public involvement?
We do. I mean, again, it's for 1% of our students, but as was mentioned before, these students have the right to access to these standards. And as we talk about inclusion for our students with significant disabilities, we want them to be learning on these standards as well, but we also want to take into consideration their disabilities. And so, Steve Phelps spoke earlier today, and he's very aware that that's a big push in our state right now, is to make sure that our students who are even very significant are accessing our academic standards just like their peers.
Thank you. Looks like we have a couple of hands up. I'm just going to go left to right on my screen. So that's Jenny, and then Brent, please.
Yeah, so my question is this: as soon as we approve or we start a process, so that in this case, maybe our science standards for the younger grades, as soon as the board approves that in essence, that will start the process for this as well. So we will do the one, and the second it's approved, it'll begin this alternative process. Is that accurate?
Is it okay if I answer that?
I asked that in a very confusing way. I'm sorry if I did.
Not at all. I understand completely. That actually is the step 1, is those core standards were approved, and that triggers us in our review process. So that's our trigger to get started.
So really, when we start the regular process, it is an element of triggering it, but you have to wait till we approve, right? And then it would begin that your end of that process. So this triggers both of those when we say, yeah, we're going to redo our math standards. The only thing is you have to wait for us to complete and approve, and then you would begin yours. Does that make sense?
Yes, Board Member Earl, I believe that's correct. I mean, we follow along, right? We want to make sure that we understand what's happening in the writing process, and that they're also getting sort of that special education perspective, but we can't align to standards that aren't written yet. So that's the first thing that triggers, is once those new standards are adopted.
Okay.
So, and then I just had another question. Does a parent request that these are used, or does the IEP team request that they have the alternative standards used, or is it just what's the process for deciding at what point these standards are used versus the other? Is it just a team decision, or is there some kind of a mechanism that helps in making that determination?
Chair Hansen, you're okay if I answer that?
Yep,
Okay.
please go ahead.
Yes, so it is only for students with significant cognitive disabilities, and that is an IEP team decision. We of course have guidelines, and there is board rule that discusses who is a student with a significant cognitive disability, but it is an IEP team decision.
And it sounds like, maybe just to chime in, so there'd be a medical diagnosis on most of these, is that right?
Not necessarily a medical diagnosis. They just have to have, the students have to have significant impairments in their cognitive and adaptive abilities. There often is a medical diagnosis, but it's not a requirement.
But so the IEP team has that freedom then, even if there's not a medical diagnosis to apply.
Yes.
Okay. Brent, let's go to you.
Yes, I was wondering, do you do different standard revisions for mild, moderate, and severe, or it's the same set?
Yeah, please go ahead, Tanya.
Okay, thank you. Yes, board member Straight. So this is for our students again that are significantly impaired. So our students that are, quote unquote, mild, moderate, they are accessing the same instructional standards as their general education peers.
Okay. Any other questions from committee members? This is an actionable item, and the action that we're looking for is to move this process, accept this process, and move it forward to the board for approval. So please take a close look and see if we're ready to do that at this point.
Yes, I think so.
Oh,
go ahead.
Okay, Janet, please.
Chair, I will make the motion you just articulated.
Okay, I'm not sure that I made a very motion-like articulation, but so the motion before the committee is that we accept the Alternative Achievement Core Standards Review process as presented here. And do we have a draft number on that, or?
This would be draft 1.
Okay, draft 1. Let's see, are we on a second reading here? Help me a little bit, Patty, with where we are. The motion is just the first reading.
It's on the first, yes, it's on the first reading.
Accepted in the committee on the first reading. And the motion will be to move that to the board for approval on the second and final reading there.
So now I have a question. Is this the type of document that would go through a reading process, or is this a document that just is on an approval process? Does it need 3 readings, or does it just need approval of our committee and to be sent to the board?
I'll have to phone a friend on that one, Patty, or is there someone else? I see Jeff's on.
I thought it was just rules that we did the reading process for. And this isn't a rule, right? This is just a revision process, standards revision.
Okay, there's Angie. She's lit up her screen. Can you help us?
Yes, thank you. You are correct, Board Member Cannon. The readings are specific to rules. And for other documents, it's really just one approval by a committee and then one approval by the full board. And really, it's the approval by the full board that generally matters. So you're correct.
So we'll reword that. Thank you, Janet, for reining us in. So we will, as a committee, approve the draft 1 of the Alternate Achievement Core Standards Review process and move that to the board for a final approval. That's the motion. If we can have you vote, please, on that.
Thank you, Chair. I didn't see it written out anywhere in what we were given, so I was a little foggy on how to do that.
So was I, and it looks like we're seeing that on the screen now. If you look, so the committee forwarded a recommendation to the board that USB adopt draft 1 of the Alternate Achievement Standards Revision process and forward it to the board for final approval. So, okay, it looks like we've got votes up for everyone but you, Janet, and let me see, Laura is able to vote as well. So looks like we're unanimous in the affirmative on that one. So that motion passes.
Chair Hansen?
Yes.
I'm sorry. I just had one more question for clarification because I was concerned about the way either the questioning or the answer was that Jenny was asking. And I believe that this was the answer, Jenny, that we have to finish the standards review for science, let's say, before they can start the alternative ones. It's completed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I understood it.
Okay, all right, thank you.
So
Sorry, I didn't ask it very well. I apologize.
There's got to be an approved standard for them to build on with the alternative. So, okay. Let's move then forward to the next one. And thank you for helping us with that one. We're on 3.5. This is a discussion about school counselor ratios. And let me get that up on my screen. This one is an action. And we will ask Jerry if, there she is. We'll ask Jerry to help us with this, and please go ahead.
Yes, so I'm Jerry Sagers, School Counseling Program Specialist. Nice to be with you today. So R277462-6, School Counselor to Student Ratios, requires USBE staff to gather and report information regarding school counselor to student ratios. And those that do not, LEAs not meeting the recommended school counselor to student ratio of 1 to 350 or better as an average are required to submit a plan for how they intend to meet this ratio. So the recommended action is that the committee approves the school counselor to student ratio plans submitted by LEAs who do not meet the 1 to 350 ratio requirement and forward the plans to the board for final approval.
Okay, thank you. Do we have questions from committee members about the counselor ratios? Janet, please. Oh, go ahead, Janet, you're on mute.
Sorry, we had a similar item come before us last year. I'm wondering if any of these schools that are on our list are repeaters from last year, or did the ones that we saw last year come into alignment with the requirement and move on?
Chair Hansen, can I speak to that?
Jerry, please.
So good, that's a great question. And yes, we have 2 repeaters, American Learning Leadership Academy and Iron as well. As you can see on their plans, if you've had a chance to read those, American Leadership Academy, they had a difficult time getting a part-time counselor. And so they hired an aide to help, but their plan is to hire an intern next year, and they hope to meet ratio next year. And then Iron, they hired 2 new counselors this year and still were a bit off. And so their plan is to hire another counselor next year, and then they will meet ratio as well. So they're both really trying and working towards this ratio.
Okay, may I follow up with another question?
Yeah, please. I have a question, Janet, just on the same one that you had. Is that okay? I noticed that it looked like Morgan was out of ratio last year too. I'm looking at the, I don't know which one of the charts you called. This one has the various fiscal years, 17 through 21, and then shows the ratios on it. Is that?
No, last year was American Leadership, Cash, Davis, and Iron.
Okay, I must not be looking at that chart right. Go ahead, Janet, with your next question, and I'll
okay. So my concern was Morgan. I guess I wasn't impressed with their report when they were asked why haven't they met the 1 to 350 ratio. Their response was state school populations grow faster than FTE. And I thought that was that wasn't
speak
in
to
line
that.
with what we were hearing from others who were making significant, moves to try to come into compliance. So I wondered, I didn't feel like that was them really making a good-hearted effort to come into compliance. I'm wondering what the staff thought about that.
Yeah, please go ahead, Jerry. I think, though, Janet, there is another page to that says
there is another page where they did say that FTE has been approved for FY22 for both middle schools that will bring them into compliance. Morgan Middle School has already hired a 0.5 counselor for FY22, and Mountain Green will be making a new hire soon. So even though they did say just simply why, they do have a plan.
Okay, I found that second page. I feel better about them now.
Okay.
Thank you.
Jerry, could you look with me though at Morgan on the, I'm looking at school counselor to student ratio per year chart that you prepared, which yes. I really appreciate the way that you kind of mixed and matched this data for us so that we could look at it. I like spreadsheets and you gave us plenty of them. But if I look at Morgan, I was just looking at 4 of the last 5 years, it looks like that they've been out of ratio if I'm looking at it right. And I wondered if that was maybe because the area is growing so fast or what we might be thinking on that.
Yeah, and that is what Morgan, response is. And I know that they're trying to work and hire more. And I believe, is Morgan the one that hired, maybe they're not the one that hired, yeah, that was Iron that hired social workers instead of school counselors. But yes, you're right with Morgan.
I can say just a little bit.
Yeah.
Because that's where I live. The growth there has been significant over the last 3 to 4 years. And I think they're like some places in the state, and many actually, it was, it's pretty small, but it grew pretty quick. There's been significant changes, hundreds of students in a area that had 3 schools, and then we expanded to 5. So anyways, I can't speak to the complexity or why it's such a simple answer, but I can just speak to what the growth is.
Mm.
Right, and in the secondary counselor school, the longitudinal district, it shows that Morgan was 0.17 last year, and they're 0.57 this year, lacking. So that's why they weren't counted last year.
Oh, okay. So if we're given a little bit of wiggle room then.
Yes. Oh, yes. They're given 0.25.
Okay, I see. And I think it's interesting now that we're getting more flexible in hiring a half a counselor or a quarter of a counselor where we haven't just come in for a day or something, where in the past, I know it was kind of discrete units. And in some of these smaller districts, the difference between 1 and 2 counselors would really move their ratios around a lot. So Laura, I see you've been patiently waiting with your hand up.
Yeah, but I actually have 2 questions. How did the change with CTE and not being able to use counselors unless they were completely with us for a CTE student, how did that change the ratio? And then also we have this 1 to 350, but when I first got on the board, it was 1 to 300. Why have we made this jump to 350? And what is the average across the country?
So my understanding, and this is before my time, and the CTE, I'm going to have to, I do not know about CTE and a change. So I'll have to get information on that for you. I'm not knowledgeable about that. But from my understanding, back in around 2010, the board discussion at the time was that they recognized the importance of establishing a school counselor to student ratio in Utah, but wanted to set a more realistic expectation due to high student ratios and limited funding. And if it was 300, that was before my time, and I've only known about the 1 to 350.
Thank you.
Oh, and I did want to tell you the national average is 1 to 250. The American School Counselor Association does recommend 1 to 250.
So Jerry, maybe I could follow on that. So is that just a recommendation, or is that really the national average? Are we that far off of the national average?
We are very low in the national average. It goes anywhere from 250 to 800, but yes, we're kind of there in the middle, but we're not by any means. I wish that we were 1 to 250. I wish that was a recommendation for our students, because there is research that shows what a difference, and you can see that on the background of the research of what a difference it makes to have counselors 1 to 250.
Okay, Laura, you have any follow-ups?
No, that's good. I'll take my hand down. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Looks like Janet.
Well, I was just going to give a tale from my state board days of yore. So many years ago, we became really concerned about how far off our counselor to student ratio was. And we spent several years asking for legislative funding to reach that ratio. And my recollection is that then give a significant amount of funding to that, they said, we will make the ratio 1 to 350, and we will expect districts to fund that however they can. And so I think since that time, districts have been trying to meet that ratio as best they can. That's my recollection.
And thank you for that historical
history.
Oh, Jenny, please. Oh, Jenny, you're on mute.
Are we ready for an action?
Yeah, I had one quick question.
Okay,
yes,
go ahead.
If you wanted to go ahead with that. So Jerry, I looked again at that chart, the school counselor to student ratios per year, and I saw a couple like Tinnick, which I know very small district, but they were at like 444, and I didn't see any action. There was another one, North Davis Prep, that looked like it was at 520, and I didn't see. And is there am I looking at this wrong, or is there some explanation for that?
Okay, so which sheet are you looking at? And maybe we'll have to
Yep, school counselor to student ratios, that's the one. And if we go down on that page there, Tinnick, 444, and it looks like it really came up from where they've been historically. And I wondered, I didn't see any action plan or a plan from them. I just wondered if there was something going on there. And then the same on the back side with the North Davis Prep. They also seem to have really jumped up this last year to 520.
Yeah. So with the equation of when we get our reports from our data analysts with Cactus and the October 1 count, these are the percentages that come out. So if you from 1 to, yes, Tinnick went from 111 to 444. And with one counselor, they are only 0.07 less than what they need to be. So that's how come Tinnick, if they would have been over the 0.25, then they would have had to do a plan as well. And then as you're talking about North Davis Prep, they've gone up from 260 to 520, and they were really close that they would have had to have done a plan because they're 0.24.
Okay, I see. So if with these small schools, they can have a big jump in the ratio and still not need an action plan just because they need less than a quarter of a counselor. I get it. Okay.
Right.
Thank you. That helps me to understand the system a little bit better. Jenny, please go ahead.
Yeah, I recommend that the committee approves the school counselor to counselor ratio plan submitted by LEAs who do not meet the 1 to 350 ratio requirement and forwards the plans to the board for final approval.
Okay, we have a motion then before the committee that the committee approve the school counselor to student ratio plan submitted by LEAs who did not meet the 1 to 350 ratio requirement and forward the plan to the board for final approval. Please go ahead and vote. It looks like Laura says no. So we have 4 in favor and 1 nay. The motion passes. Have you got that, Nora Lee, then?
I do, Chair. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Okay, thank you. We appreciate the help, Karen. And we will move ahead to our next item. We get there. So we are on the item 3.6. This is the USEEP memo on inclusionary practices. And I believe that we have, Leah, are you going to talk to us about the Washington?
I am, Chair.
And all of that. Okay, we'll let you go ahead then, please.
Thank you. Leah Voorhees, Assistant Superintendent of Student Support. So this memo comes to you after the USEEP meeting that took place in March. You remember it was on the agenda last month, but we didn't have time to get to it. I'm going to give you a little bit of history. The USEEP panel in January, one of the priorities that they chose for the year to study was inclusionary practices in Utah. In January, they forwarded a memo to you about systemic change for meaningful inclusion, which you adopted for consideration, and the Law and Licensing Committee then considered each of the 4 recommendations in the memo. And then yesterday, you approved the recommendations that the Law and Licensing Committee forwarded related to systemic change for meaningful inclusion. After that discussion of the panel, their March discussion, they chose to look at a systemic model for improving inclusionary practices for students with disabilities, the model that Washington State has adopted the last couple of years. So this recommendation comes to you after they had the state special education director from Washington State, who is our former state special education director, Glenna Gallo, here in Utah, come to their meeting. And we had a great conversation with Glenna about the process that Washington is undertaking to improve inclusionary practices for students with disabilities. And they now bring this recommendation about adopting a very similar model, although scaled down model to what Washington State is adopting in Utah. So the recommendation would require that we develop a business case to take to the legislature for funding to implement a scaled down version of the Washington Inclusionary Practices Program model. And that is the memo that they have brought forward to you today, and I am open to questions, Chair.
No, I'm the one with my mute button on. We've got a couple of hands up. Jenny, please go ahead, and then Janet, you're on deck.
Yeah, I guess I would like a lot more information before I ask the legislature to take on a whole major project. I looked through Washington's model and everything, and I'm not sure how they've got data yet to say what they're doing is successful or not, and maybe it's just a general summary. just because they passed their bill in 2019. So any implementation would have started in the fall of 2019, which really would have been a few months before COVID, and then it was COVID this last year. I guess what I'm saying is I really want to see the information, the data, what it is they're doing or not doing. And the other thing is that Washington State, in looking at inclusionary practices previously, and that's probably why they're doing a large systemic type of a change, but they were one of the lower in the nation as far as inclusion models, or those that had students in the classroom up to 80% of the time. And I'm sure that's why they're looking at how they can improve on things. So I guess I'd like data on where we are, some information on where we are. And I'm not questioning that we need this. So those that are listening, don't get me wrong. We definitely need to look at the direction to go, what's successful, but I'm not clear, or I'm not sure that Washington is the model we necessarily want to jump on board with. I'd like to see what else is available out there, what other things are going on. I'd like to see the data on this information. And I would also like to see, I would like a clear understanding where Utah is currently, instead of a big ask, but no research or information behind it. And we know we need to move this direction. So I'm not questioning that. I need more information, I guess is what I'm saying. So that's my initial comments.
Jenny, thank you for that. And I think hold on to those things. Maybe you can be, as we listen to other comments and have questions, just making a list of a specific kind of a data request. If we're going to ask staff to come back with more information, let's make sure that we give them good direction when we finish this discussion. So let's go ahead, Janet, with your question.
Yeah, I appreciate Jenny's comments. I think if the idea is to develop a business case to take to the legislature, then we need a lot of data, evidence-based data. I know the legislature likes to look at return on investment. And I'm wondering if we could do some positive documentation around an ask of this kind. I for one, would love to see more inclusionary practices, but I think we need to be strong in our presentation of the need and what money we want to ask for and what that money would be going for and what we would expect in terms of positive outcomes from that type of expenditure.
Thank you, Janet. Let's hear from Laura and then Leah. We'll have you respond. I think all these are going kind of the same direction. So let's, Laura, let's hear what you have to say, and then we'll have Leah talk to us. Go ahead, Laura.
Thank you, Chair. I do know that already there's some legislators who would like to run something like this already. But the other piece of that is tracking these kids. The last part of this background, where UC meets quarterly to review the data related to the LEA compliance. That's very important to how tracking our special ed kids. And the term that somebody sent to me was our special ed kids are in peril, and they actually are. So I guess my question would be to follow up on this and go to Leah. So Leah, what kind of data do we have that this is the type of project we need to have moving forward now?
Okay, Leah, you've got 3 versions of the same question, I think, is, if we're going to move forward with this, how do we make a good business case for it? And I know in our conversation, we were talking about not necessarily duplicating the Washington project because we're not in the same situation as Washington, as I understand it. And when you introed this, I think you said a scaled down project. So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about what kind of data there is, and then what your initial thoughts are on a proposal that would be made to the legislature.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to do that. And thank you for all of the questions and the desire to really look at the contextual factors related to Utah. So Utah reports annually, and you receive that report every year in March. We report annually to the Office of Special Education Programs in the Department of Education on the number of students, as Board Member Earl commented, the number of students with disabilities who receive their services and supports that are on their IEPs in the general education classroom, and they spend at least, or they spend 80% of their time or more in the general education classroom. Students who spend 40 to 79% of their time in the general education classroom, students who receive their services and supports in a special school or at home or in a residential treatment program. So we have years and years of data related to our statewide landscape on each of those indicators, and then also related to each LEA. And at least 5 years of data is available on our website for public consumption and for you to be able to review as well. We also break all of that data down by disability category. So there are 13 disability categories outlined in the Individuals with Disabilities Act, and we have that data by disability category. We can also break that data down by school, although the reporting feature is by LEA. But what the data that USEEP reviewed in their January meeting was 5-year trend data in Utah related to the state and how the state has made progress in supporting students with disabilities to receive grade level, grade appropriate content from content experts, hopefully, in classes with their general education peers. And there's an important piece to this particular puzzle that we do have to put on the table, and that's that IEP teams make these decisions. IEP teams determine if a student is going to receive his or her services in the general education classroom, in a special classroom with other students with disabilities, in a special school that is only for students with disabilities, in their home, or in a residential treatment center or hospital. So IEP teams make those decisions. But like I said yesterday, when we talked about the recommendation from the Law and Licensing Committee, systems, LEAs and schools can improve and increase their inclusionary practices to be able to support the time that students spend and make better use of the time that students spend in general education classrooms and access to grade level content. So IEP teams make that decision, but systems can really improve the services and supports that are available to students with disabilities after IEP teams have made those decisions. So we do have a lot of data that USEEP reviewed and that they would happily share with all of you. But what I think would get closer to the questions that you are asking would be to put that data into a form that says, here are the places in our state where we could focus our efforts on improving inclusionary practices. This particular group of LEAs, or this particular region, or this particular disability category. And then the Washington model has a universal a tier where all LEAs, all educators in the state can receive professional learning about inclusionary practices just universally. Then they have a targeted tier where LEAs who are interested in improving inclusionary practices can get coaching to help them in their context. And then they have an intensive tier, and this really speaks to what Board Member Earl was saying, those LEAs that the state identified needed to improve their inclusionary practices, they are receiving very targeted support and coaching. So the Washington model, and that's the thing that USEEP really appreciated, is that targeted and tiered support for LEAs. We could certainly do that in Utah, and that's what USEEP would like to do. And maybe it would be helpful for you for USEEP to spend the time to flesh more out that their vision for that tiered model of universal support for all stakeholders and all staff, targeted support for those LEAs who really want to improve themselves, and then intensive support for those LEAs that we identify could really improve in inclusionary practices. And maybe if we presented that type of data to you, it would address the questions that you have. And just to let you know, USEEP would be very open to doing that. In fact, Steve Phelps, who provided public comment at the beginning, he has asked several members, probably about a dozen members of USEEP, to create an ad hoc task force to really look at inclusionary practices across the state. And so that could be the first thing that they take on if that was the direction you would like them to go.
There we go. Thank you, Leah. Jenny, you've still got your hand up. You have a follow-up?
Yeah, for me, just reading this whole, right, it just wasn't enough to say, yeah, let's do so what you're saying is what I need so that I can make an educated movement in the right direction. So I had to go look up Washington stuff. Do you know what I'm saying? So for me, I wasn't able to say, oh yeah, this is a great idea. I just don't know if it's a great idea. And it sounds like they've had presentations. There's no documentation here, so I don't even know. I had to go look for that myself, which is fine. Everything doesn't have to be spoon-fed. I'm not suggesting that, but it wasn't enough for me to make a decision. Yes, let's move forward on this. So I appreciate what you're saying. If you could reach out to them and have them provide us with the things that you're suggesting, that would be great. One other, and I asked this question when I emailed you. And we want a parent component where they know what it works. I don't know how to say that, where there's a place where they can go and receive information so that when they go to their meetings, and I know there's a variety of resources out there, but if we could beef that up so that when they go to their IEP meetings, they're like, these are the resources that my child, and looking at my child and the resources that are available, I can ask my school for these things for that child, so that it's within that, it becomes inclusionary, but the parent as well as the educator is making that decision together. And there's one other thing I was the other question is, and I know you said we don't know that, but to me, it's how many of these IEPs are out of compliance. In other words, if they're meeting with parents and the parents are saying, and the educators are saying, this works for us, even if it's less than 80%, then I'm just trying to understand where our compliance level doesn't equal what our capacity to actually integrate, right? Or to include students more fully. So any information along that lines would be beneficial for me.
Thank you, Jenny. And Leah, I don't know if you have any immediate response to that, or
can I respond, Chair?
Yeah, please. Let's have a brief response, and then we'll go to Brent. And then I think it looks like the direction we're headed is we're going to be asking you for some more information to come back, and I'll try and put that together here in just a second. But please go ahead, Leah, and then Brent.
So one of our partners, we do have a representative from the Parent Center on the panel, and one of our the State Board of Education's very strong partners is the Parent Center. And after USEEP made this recommendation, the executive director of the Parent Center and I have already set up a meeting to talk about exactly what you are recommending. And so we're already working on that, because I completely agree, Board Member Earl, that is something that would be really helpful to parents. And so
Leah, I'm sorry, is that the, sorry to interrupt, but just to clarify, is that this menu of services that Board Member Earl was talking about? That's
well,
what you're working on?
Yeah. Resources for parents that would be accessible to parents about evidence-based inclusionary practices.
Thank you. Sorry to cut you off. Please go ahead.
Nope, that's exactly what I wanted to say. Yeah, that's we want to work with, we are going to be working with the Parent Center to provide resources to parents about evidence-based inclusionary practices. So they have more idea when they go into IEP meetings, when they're talking to teachers, when they're looking at the services and supports that would help their students in the context of their student with the needs that are possibly disability specific for their students.
Thank you. Member Straight, your hand's down now. Is your question answered?
Well, I've been debating whether to bring this up, but there is a part of me that I'm trying to understand the connection here between what we're talking about here and last night's equity discussion and the rule. Because I know that Mr. Phelps, he had mentioned from that meeting, and I felt bad because I definitely care about this, and my understanding yesterday was that that was also inclusive of this to a certain degree. I know that and so I'm trying to make the connection between it, because I feel bad that there was the thought perhaps by Mr. Phelps that only 3 of the board members cared about this issue and cared about inclusionary practices. I think that's just a misunderstanding. So is there a connection between yesterday's rule and on inclusion and the inclusion that's mentioned here?
I'm sorry, I have to mute myself because I've got a little rough throat, but Leah, would you like to field that one? I have a couple of comments too, but go ahead.
So yes, I think, so inclusion for students with disabilities is very specific to where the student receives the services and supports that are outlined on his or her IEP. So inclusion is a term of art when it comes to students with disabilities. But to your point, Board Member Straight, inclusion also has a much broader definition when it comes to all students feel included in this school community and are included in this school community. It's especially important to students with disabilities because it is legislated, and because students with disabilities are first general education students and need access to the entire school environment, just like any other student would have. But to your point, that there is a connection in that students with disabilities need to be included in the bigger school community, but also the word inclusion is bigger than just students with disabilities. All students need to be included in the school community. So I'm not sure that addresses your question, Board Member Straight, but
thank you. And I kind of had the same feeling that we had a very broad rule on equity that we talked about last night. And then we've got some very specialized areas that we need to go deeper. when we're dealing with our SPED students and, dealing with IEPs and things like that. And it was difficult with that rule to try to decide where to cut off, because there was, it got into bullying, it got into special education, it got into all kinds of other areas. And I think, we did our best to make a broad sweep kind of rule on equity, and then we'll do our best here with these other areas where we need to get into it more deeply. Jenny, you've got your hand up again.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe just make a little comment here, but I don't know that this is my area of expertise by any means. I'm not suggesting that, but that was way long ago, back when I finished my degree at Weber State. This is what I did it in my master's degree around inclusionary practices, but that was back 30 years ago. I mean, I don't know if I want to date myself that much. So I know a lot's changed, but I feel strongly about this enough that we need to get it right? And enough that the families and the children that are impacted by this, we need the data, we need the information. And I know that we've got these incredible people, and Mr. Phelps spoke earlier. They're familiar with the dialogue that's currently going on, and I look forward to additional information so we can really hone in on the most productive way to move forward in a way that's beneficial for these families and for these children. So that's just a side note.
Thanks, Board Member Earl. I just had a couple of things that maybe Leah can help me with. So I read a little bit after our prior conversations and after seeing the letter about the Washington study. And I understand that they have a metric where they said they were ranked 44th in inclusiveness. And I didn't understand until today, I understand a little bit more about how inclusiveness is calculated. I guess there's a universal measurement. Could we calculate our inclusiveness, and are we ranked somehow on this? And it's really about kids with a certain level of disability, how much time they're spending in general ed classrooms. Is that right?
Yes, Chair. It's a little tiny bit broader than that, because there are 3 metrics, and so then the 3 metrics have to be averaged, and it's a weighted average. So it's not just one calculation. It's a little more complicated than that. But yes, the time that students with disabilities, and not just the time that they're in general education, but that they are accessing grade appropriate content and they're receiving their services and supports in that setting. So a little bit more complicated than that, but yes, you have the general idea.
Okay, maybe general idea is enough for right now on that one. I'll get into the details later. So if Washington says they're number 44, would we know, or could we find out what our rank is? Can you tell us, or is that something that we could maybe get next time around where we are?
I can tell you in just a second. I've got the document, or I can even send it on. Is this the 2018 document, Leah, that the federal government put out?
Yeah, the fingertip facts. Is that what you're looking at?
I'm not sure, but I can send on what I read through, and it basically all according to.
Yeah, and I don't know that we need to do all that today, but we're kind of putting together a list maybe for this sales pitch, which I think that's what we're doing, right? We need to put together a sales pitch to the legislature to get some money from them. And when we're asking them for money, we need to show them return on investment, we need to show how much we plan to invest. The Washington project or program, they said they had at least an initial money of $25 million. I don't know if that's what we're looking for. I think in talking to Leah earlier, she was talking about something on a smaller scale, maybe, at least to begin with here in Utah. But that, would also, we need to, if we're going to ask, we've got to know how much we're going to ask for, and then we've got to know what we're going to spend that on. So I would, I think from what I've heard from committee members, there's certainly no one saying no to this. We're all saying, let's go forward, but let's go forward in a smart way. And to do that, I think we're requesting that business case. The business case, as I understand it, should include data on where Utah is compared to other states, data on the practices that Washington has used and which ones we would plan to incorporate, and then anything that would show how effective that is. Their program has, I think was mentioned, it's only been in effect for a year or a year and a half or something. So how effective that is, and which things we plan to incorporate. And then what we would expect to see if we were able to do this in a way that Washington did, or even if we were able to do it a little bit better, what kind of growth or improvement we could expect. Are there other things, board members, that we want to request from staff? Jenny, you've still got your hand up.
Yeah, oh, sorry, now I've lost my train of thought. I had two things. One, we have the ARP funding. Some of these things we could be thinking of quickly that don't require legislation for next year. This is exactly where that funding should be going and could create some valuable resources available for educators and just in that learning loss, those that are most vulnerable. So, that's one area we could aggressively, quickly move forward on in the next couple months. I'm not sure when we have to have all those together, but that's a quick funding opportunity for some of these pieces. If we have the information and the data and we can begin the process that way. And the other question I had, I'm going to have to think for a minute. I'm sorry.
Okay, I see that whoever's doing the typing for us, that's Nora Lee. Appreciate you getting that on the screen. Is that you, Nora Lee?
I believe it's Patty, Chair.
Oh,
Yeah.
Is that Patty?
Okay.
You can type without moving your face. You're not even looking at your hands. That's good.
Practice.
Can I?
So we're starting.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we're starting to build, I think, our request to staff for the committee action. And I'd just like to make sure this is what we want, but we're building a business case. And so let's make a clear request to staff to do that. So Jenny, I'm going to go to Janet and then come back to you.
Chair, I was just going to say that I think we should include somewhere in the terminology a business case, because those really get down to the nickels and dimes and show exactly how we would be utilizing that money. If there's a possibility to use any money from the American Rescue Act, I'd like to know that also. But those business cases are very specific and very detailed. And so the very best one we could possibly build to make this successful, I think, would be to our benefit and the benefit of our kids. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, back to you, Board Member Earl.
Yeah, and these are some of the questions I'd asked Leah earlier, but where are the successes in Utah taking place? I don't know that we always have to reach outside the state to find what's working really well. We have incredible educators here that that we should be tapping into as resources, and also our universities, and using their depth of knowledge in order to create a successful systemic program, if that's what we're looking at, or at least look at where those successes are. And of course we can always improve, but where we've got strengths already in our state, let's take advantage of those and use those people to expand on what we need. And then I keep coming back to the question, just because a child is in a classroom for 80% of the day, once again, it's making sure that it's the appropriateness of their placement. 80% I think would be great, but is it the right placement for the child? So it's always that, are we getting the child in the right spot to meet the needs of their, so there's that compliance element, which is a little harder to measure, but that is relevant in that not all students are going to be successful at 80%. We want as many there or more, but making sure we're not, that it's an accurate placement, I guess, is what I'm looking at. So now that I've talked myself in a circle, because I like to do that.
I appreciate it. Committee members, is there anything we want to add to our request to staff? So we've got bring back a business case with information, including Utah's ranking. Where is Washington compared to other states? How effective is their program? What outcomes we should expect? How money will be utilized? How much is needed? Do we have other sources of funding like ARP? And I think that last one is an important one. It was referenced in the USEEP memo as well, that there are places in Utah that are going well. So there's something we can build on from those successes. Is there anything else that we need to add to that list? And staff is certainly welcome to add anything that you think will be valuable, but go ahead, Jenny.
There's that parent education component, because when parents know what least restrictive environment looks like and the options, then they're better able to advocate for their child. And I know that's the individuals that are on this particular advisory committee are incredible advocates. And so let's make use of those individuals in a way that we can create resources for parents so they can be the same advocates and know how and what they can advocate for.
Thank you. So the committee's had their say. Now we'll go to Dr. Voorhees. Is this enough for you and your team to be able to bring us back something in our next meeting so that we can move this forward?
We will certainly work on this, Chair. Your next meeting is in August, and USEEP is going to want to be very involved, and staff can do tons of work in the background, but USEEP does not have a meeting for August, scheduled for August. So can I recommend that you push it back a month so that USEEP actually has an opportunity to meet and discuss what we put together?
Right. Yeah, we'll work to your schedule. I think everyone, we've got the legislature coming up, at the end of the year, so we've got to move this through our process. But I think August would still give us enough time to put it to the full board and move things forward. So, okay, so I'm sorry, not August, September. Then is that right? That it would come before us?
Well, is that too soon? Because we meet the first week of September. They don't meet in August. So
that's a great question, Board Member Straight, if I may, Chair.
Sure.
So the ad hoc task force that I was talking about, I'm sure that they will be meeting, and at least they will be able to review the information before your September meeting. And of course, we can send it to the entire committee. But Board Member Straight is right. They are scheduled to meet for the first time, I think, on the 16th of September. But to your point, Chair, waiting till October may be really pushing it. So we will do what you recommend.
Okay, I think we would prefer to have it no later than September, and that may mean that USEEP will have to do some things without a formal meeting to be involved. I hope that we can't put everything on hold for the summer and then miss our opportunity,
right?
With the legislative session. So I think that would probably be the latest that we could comfortably do this, because we don't know what will come out of the full board either. And if there's more homework to do, then it may take us another month to get it through there. Okay, so we have an action then. Oh, Jenny, did you have more to add?
Yeah, my comment is, don't wait till September to send us information. If you're sending it the week before the board meeting, I mean, as if they have information that they would like us to be aware of, I would email it as soon as they've got it, because you know how it is the week before the board meeting. We're reading 1,000 pages or more. And that gives us time to think through it. So if there's readings or research or any of that information, if we get this boatload of stuff right before a standards and assessment meeting, there's a good chance we're going to try to get through it. But if there's 2 weeks from now they have some information that they think would be valuable, just so that we can start creating that framework in our mind, in my view, that I would appreciate that.
Well, I appreciate the comment, and maybe we can, when Leah, you feel like there's enough that we have a skeleton or an outline of this, you wanted to come back for a review, we can try to get you on the agenda earlier to make sure that everybody's kind of headed in the same direction, because this is important to all of us, but we do have that timeline that we've got to hit. So, okay. I am not going to read through that committee action again. I think everyone can see it on their screen. But I believe, help me, Patty, I don't know that we need a motion for this. We just need a request to staff. And I think everyone has had their say and we're okay with this. So that's where we'll leave this today. I appreciate the dialogue that's gone on and appreciate the comments earlier on this subject as well. That really helps us in our discussion.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah. Thank you, Leah. We are going to move to the last item on our agenda, I think. Let me get there. This one is item 7, so 3.7, recommended resources.
Yes, Chair Hansen, do you want me to do a brief overview?
Yeah, I'm having a hard time getting a memo to come up on my screen here.
Yeah, I have it on, I'm sharing it on the screen. And so this.
All right, thank you. I'm looking the wrong way. Please go ahead, Patty, and get us going.
Yeah, so this was clear back in April, and it was a request from this committee for us to bring back 3 things. We needed to bring back some items that are dealing with recommended resources. And so the first thing is to add a list. So at the time, the committee requested for staff to add additional resources as needed. Note if the materials are vetted, and if so, describe the vetting process that occurs. And then number 3 is to note the amount of time required. And so Director Thronson took that on, and I'm going to switch to another page chart that she created collectively within the agency, and we'll turn the time over to her to start speaking to the chart that was created in response to the actions that the committee requested.
So Jennifer Thronson, Director of Teaching and Learning, and as Patty suggested, this is a agency-wide document, so it was shared across leaders across the agency. I know I took it to my staff and had them help kind of contribute. So, and I know our other leaders did similar things to make sure we got a pretty comprehensive representation as well as an accurate representation of the various resources that come out of our office, the vetting process used for that, if there is one, and then the time required to process responses necessary. So if we're doing something, how long does it take? So the first one you're most familiar with as Standards and Assessment Board members is core standards. Those take us anywhere from 12 to 24 months, potentially longer. With COVID, I think it delayed social studies a little bit, just getting people together and those kinds of things. But in general, 12 to 24 months. Obviously, there is a vetting process. It goes through the board's approved standards revision process as required. And so that is kind of just walking you through one example. This is kind of the list that came from the committee last time that you were interested in terms of what is the vetting process, what does that look like, and the time required to kind of vet these resources. So with that said, I'm happy to answer questions. I will lean on other colleagues if they are outside of a teaching and learning experience, and I do want to represent that my experience in teaching and learning may not be exactly the same as the experience of Assistant Superintendent Voorhees or Assistant Superintendent Darren Nielsen. Any of those folks might have a little different perspective, but I'll try and represent the collective as best I can, and would welcome them to add in as they feel necessary.
Okay, thank you. Committee members, any questions on this? We've got quite a comprehensive chart now. We've had quite a bit of discussion on this. We took a couple months off. Now we're back and have a lot of information in front of us. Member Earl, please.
Yeah, my question has to. Sorry.
Yep, you muted for a second.
Unmuted. Now, yeah. My question has to do with the listservs. And it looks like those are just vetted by whoever's sending those out, which means that they're just as things come up, they send those out. I don't know if you could give us some additional information on listservs and how they're used and who is making those decisions on those, or if there's any complaints on those, what's the process for that? Or anyways, if you could just share some information on the listservs.
Sure. So I'll speak for teaching and learning, but I believe this is a pretty common practice across our agency. So we use listservs. People get to sign up on their own volition to join those listservs. And then I had one today, he retired. He's like, hey, I no longer need these. Great. So we took him off the listserv. But it is a kind of join participation listserv. And then one of our newer practices is to include that listserv in like the BC line so that others can't use it. Through the experience that you as the board have had, we've kind of fixed that process internally so that others can't reply all to the group and everybody gets that response, but that it is more moderated by staff in terms of, oh, that is useful. I, as staff, will decide to share that with the broader community on this listserv as appropriate. So in terms of the vetting of those pieces, staff use our vetting process. If there is like a resource that they're sharing, they'll use that curricular resources vetting process that the board has approved and before they add that, but it is staff judgment in terms of what goes into those listserv communications. With the question around what happens if we get a complaint, we had that this year. Earlier in the year, we sent out a resource that we had a particular LEA question on. So we went back, reviewed that resource with that tool and made a correction to the field in terms of that resource was a Google Doc, and Google Docs can change at any point in time. So when we sent it out, it may have been very appropriate, but when somebody opened it, there were new resources added. And so that kind of helped us to refine our process in terms of we don't share Google Drive kind of resources. We can share an individual resource, but not something that has multiple resources that could be linked, as we are not in control of those pieces. So that's kind of how, if there is an issue arises, that we handle it internally in terms of we learn from that, we share it with each other and kind of improve our practice from there moving forward. So that's one example I can think of in the last year that we've had feedback on.
May I add to that, Chair? Because there's also a distinction between a listserv and an email list. And I think that there's been a lot of confusion with that. A listserv is usually something that someone asks to be on. And most of those are housed through UEN. And so it's something that someone can sign up for, and it can be moderated depending on the settings that have been put in place. So I could go sign up for a listserv, meaning I want to have that information. Then there's also email lists, and that's something that as staff members that we have a group of individuals, say we have curriculum directors, and we don't want to keep retyping that list over and over and over again every time we send out any communication to a group of individuals. So we create an email list of people, and so those are two different things, and they've kind of been conflated together where people think they're the same thing. So one is where it's selected, like these are the individuals who will receive these, and then the other is a listserv is one that people can ask to be on or sign up for, and then that is also vetted what those are. And we have Jared Phelps that can speak more to those what that means. I think Jared is just coming in right now if you want more information on that.
Okay. Do we need more, Jenny, or is that pretty much understood how those work?
Yeah, my next question is on, because the information or curriculum that sometimes is sent out or resources, either on listservs or I guess it could be on an email too, I'm not sure. Is there any kind of indication that that actual content is not been either approved by the board, or do you know what I mean? Almost like a disclaimer kind of a thing that this is just a possible resource and it's not received the approval of the state board itself.
Yes, so we have a disclosure statement, and if you give me just a moment, I can pull it and put it in the chat box if you'd like to see it. That articulates this is not, the board's approval. This is just staff kind of sharing resources. I'd be happy to throw that in the chat box for review. If you guys have revisions to that statement, we do have a kind of disclosure statement that we put into any email that we include resources on.
And Chair, can I follow up on that?
Yeah, please.
So prior to this, it was a kind of a hit and miss. In all honesty, Board Member Earl, not every staff member had a disclaimer statement at the bottom of the email. And so within the last year, there's been a lot of communication about resources and the vetting of resources. And so there's been a lot more discussion about how finite those resources should be, meaning should we just send a PDF or an access to a website or a Google Doc, as Director Thronson was explaining before. And so Director Thronson has been very proactive in that with teaching and learning to create a disclaimer statement on the bottom of the website, which is what, or email responses, which is what she'll be sharing. And I also know Jeff Van Holten is on here as well, and he's been working on one with Chief of Staff Tiffany Stanley that is an agency-wide one so that it is more clear. And so I don't know if we want more information from him as well.
I think it'd be helpful to see what we're using now, if we can get that in the chat, and then realizing there is a disclaimer is probably good. I don't know that we need to get into the details right now.
Sorry to interject. The chat's disabled.
Yeah,
Patty,
I saw that.
I could send it to Patty and she can put it on the screen maybe.
Okay, that'll be helpful.
Right.
Can I just ask a follow-up on this? Jennifer, I think you said that there's a check sheet or something that's being used to kind of self-vet by the person who's responsible for the listserv. Is that right? And those, I imagine, would be different for each content area, or what does that look like? What are the check sheets?
So the rubric, no, it's not a rubric, it's kind of a yes/no checklist that we created for the core guides. We use that same piece for the resource vetting that you all approved for core guides. We've just repurposed it for those same things apply when we're sharing resources. And so we use those same around, is there a bias? Is it developmentally appropriate? Those pieces. And I can pull that document up and share it with Patty as well, if you'd like, to remind the board of what that looks like.
Director Thronson, I just gave you sharing rights so you can pull both of those up.
Okay.
My question on that, I think that's a great starting point, but on some of these we have individually, well, specific content that's specific to an area where maybe some certain sections of code might apply or different things. Is that just up to the person who's running the listserv to understand which sections of code need to be checked, or is that part of the check sheet?
It's part of the check sheet in terms of, it says the first step is the language you're going to see is the core guide, but basically just repurposed it. But it says the core guide is in compliance with code or policy. So the specialist that is sending out the email would know their code or policy, like Jody Parker. If it's about sex education or health education, physical education, she's aware of her codes and policies and would consider, is this appropriate for mine or not? So we've made it generic enough that no matter your content area isn't really a factor, because it's code or policy. It's not social studies code or policy, it's just code or policy. And let me put this up on the screen because I think it'll help.
No, I appreciate that understanding. So we're not checking off this individual code or policy is okay. We're just saying in general, I know what my codes and policies that apply are, and they're okay. I've thought through that and they're okay.
Yeah, that's the intention of this. So you've got the first one here that's on the screen is alignment with current statute or policy. And so it's kind of a yes/no piece. And it may not be applicable. Some of our content areas don't have code or policy that dictate theirs explicitly. They always have, generic code or policy that could. And then alignment to standards, is it, appropriate for the grade level, the course that you're, sending it to on a listserv. Relevant research or evidence base, is it a reliable source that we would want to share given what we know in the research literature. Accessible without bias, limited or no advertising or political interest, so kind of keeping that bias out. And then we have the accuracy of the information. Is it developmentally appropriate? And access to resources don't require sharing personal information. I think Board Member Earl brought this up when we were doing it, where they don't have to log in to get access to something, that they can just, it's freely available. So those are the things that when we send out resources, we use the checklist and then we put the disclaimer. And the disclaimer is a newer practice just because of some of the, I think you all were like, oh, it looks like the board is sending these things out. So when we share resources, we've included that disclosure statement.
Jenny, you've got your hand up, please.
Yeah, I do still. I just have a couple of questions, so I appreciate you humoring me. And I'm grateful we're using this, was something we worked hard on. for quite a while. My question, so our professionals that are at our state office, are we making sure that the content they're sending out at different meetings and whatever is available on our site? In other words, they're not private mechanisms or private sites that they're controlling. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so you could access the information from our website for something that they're.
I know that UEN's been mentioned already, but I'll let these folks answer. So Jennifer or Patty, you help us with that. Where's the information housed? If it goes out on a listserv, are we in control, or is it somewhere offsite, or are there multiple locations there it could be?
So for like our listservs that are emails, it's just going out to anyone who signs up. So the listserv is public. If anyone wants to register, they can get into the listserv and apply to be added. But in terms of do we post everything we email? Certainly not. So I'm going to leave it at that.
But the listservs themselves, are they in USBE control as far as the information that's referenced there? Or is it
the signing up for them is in UEN, for at least the ones in teaching and learning. Ours are housed through UEN, but then they're governed by staff.
Right. In fact, we have Jared Phelps on, and he can describe that process, because when you create a listserv through UEN, you actually have to have controls that are set in place, whether or not you allow anyone to set up, whether it needs to be moderated. There's some controls that can be set up for that vetting process. And I don't know, Jared, if you want to add to that at all.
Sure, if you don't mind. This is Jared Phelps.
Please go ahead, Jared. Glad to have you here. Thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, Patty's exactly right. There's not much to add. All of the controls are housed at UEN. So when you go to create a listserv, it asks you a series of questions and who will be moderating that. And you can make it as strict or as open as you want. We don't host any listservs at USBE. We have distribution groups, which is part of our email groups. And those are created by IT and sometimes by staff, if they want to create their own personal group in Outlook, or if they want more of a global group that's used by all of staff at USBE. So those are the two differences there.
Right. And then I wanted to follow up, if possible, Chair, on what Director Thronson was stating, which is we now put, if it's an email list, so not the listserv, but an email list that we've created, say, for curriculum directors, that's always a good one to go to. If we create an internal email list, just so we don't have to type all of those out, we now put it in the BC line. One of the reasons is because of what's been happening currently. We actually had 2 cases of this just within the past few months, where someone has gotten a hold of that email list, and they've taken it and used it as a vendor. And then they've sent something out to the curricula directors asking for them to purchase something. And so used in a way that's inappropriate, and that's why we started the practice of having it be in the BC line, because we don't want to promote the practice of having outside vendors have free access to a group of individuals who already get enough emails.
I'm going to ask a couple of quick questions, and then we'll move to board member straight. So with regard to the listservs, if I understand, that's do people get a notification when something changes on the listserv, or do they go in to access this on a specific site, or how do people? Is it a push system or is it a pull system for the people who are accessing the information? How does that work?
So the listservs are basically an email. So you have a group that signs up to be part of that listserv. When we send an email, they get it. There's no acceptance of it. They just receive it. They can ask to be removed. They can do it themselves. Most people just email us if they want to be removed and say, can you remove? We have, retirement this time of year is pretty common. When people retire, they're like, hey, can you remove me and add my replacement? And so we do a lot of switching in and out. But it is an email kind of process. Even though it's a listserv, it is basically getting a group of emails and being able to send through that listserv.
Okay. And then those are accessible. And you're saying anybody could sign up to be on a listserv. So if board members wanted to be included in these listservs, they could be there and they would get those emails and be able to access the data.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I sign up for all of my team. So you will get many emails depending on what you want. So it's my way of monitoring to make sure like what's going out and to be able to give them feedback along the way. So I get probably between the newsletters we put out weekly for the arts and mathematics and gifted and talented, there's at least one a week. Most of us have tried to limit our emails to one a week just to help say, instead of bothering you every day, we're just going to create one email that you get once a week. So I oversee the curriculum directors. They get the weekly Wednesday. So every Wednesday they get an email from me with what's going on and things for them to be aware of. And generally we try and constrain it to once a week just to help reduce people's burden.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think we're talking about here the vetting part of it, which that chart is very helpful. And we're also talking about the transparency part, where, if people want access, how can they get access to it? And, so please go ahead, Brent.
Thank you. I really appreciate these improved processes. Very effective, and I like looking at that list and understanding. I did have a question. For example, things that are outside of USBE, such as Utah Online Library. Is there any connection that we need to? Well, I'm not sure what my question is, but I guess it has to do with. Is there any vetting in regards to that, or is that a standalone completely?
You've asked Jennifer, are you the right one?
Yeah, I can handle it. We have a couple of products that USBE actually owns in terms of we pay the bills that UEN oversees for us. So Noodle Tools, for example, we pay for that service, but it is housed at UEN. And we have a Gale Cengage as component as well. But beyond those, they are controlled and overseen by UEN and the legislative. You guys saw the bill that came out in terms of the vetting process they have to go through related to the resources they have, but we have little to no control unless we actually own the products that they're housing.
Does that help, Brent?
Yes, I just, is this making things more efficient, or is this creating a lot more work?
When you say this, what are you talking about?
I'm sorry. Are these new processes, are they creating greater efficiency, or are they creating a lot of extra work?
Okay, let's go. Patty's got her hand up. Please go ahead.
What I'll say to that is it reduces risk. And right now in reducing risk for staff, that's one thing that they really have appreciated. Because they are all doing their very best work and don't want to be called out for something that was, when they're doing their very best efforts. So this reduces the risk, and that puts them in a more safe place emotionally when they come to work. So I would say that the extra work of going through this actually helps reduce that risk for staff, which also reduces the risk for teachers and also for students. So down the line, it's better. And I think that really taking a closer look at all of our processes was a good thing, and putting these systems in place, because now we can speak to them instead of someone saying, did you know? We can say, yes, we were aware. This is a process we've gone through. And if that vetting process doesn't work, then as Director Thronson, it's not still up there, you can see, then they can bring it to someone, and then we can go through and say, well, that vetting process didn't work for this item, so now we can review this item. And so it's a process that's been put in place that I think helps and benefits many people at all levels of the educational system. So does it take longer? Yes. Is it worth it? Yes.
Yeah, well said, Patty. I appreciate that. And I think if you remember, committee members, we had some issues where there was kind of a blame game going on, and we should be owning that. I mean, the board should be directing staff to have a process. If the process is followed, then staff should be in good shape. And if the process is bad and they're following it, then it should come back to us, because we're the ones that are helping to put the process in place. So we just want to make sure that we're allowing people to have the freedom to do good work, but also the tools to do good work as well. And I think sometimes things develop organically, and we start doing things, and we have to take a step back and look at it and see what sort of safeguards do we need to put in place, and maybe slow down a little bit. I think we've had to do that, but I echo that. I think it's worth it because it does shift, gives our staff freedom to work and the ability to do that, and shifts some of that responsibility back to us where it should be. Jenny, you've got your hand up.
I still do. I have about 5 questions left. I'm sorry to be
Okay.
quick. Thanks for your patience. So you kind of address complaint processes. If there is a complaint process, if an educator has a complaint process, should they take that to our hotline or call someone directly? What's the best thing for that type of a scenario?
Yeah, I most of the time our educators just don't know who to contact. I mean, if it's teaching and learning staff, they may not even know they're on the teaching and learning team. So the hotline might be helpful. Those come to me in terms of if they're teaching and learning related. And so I can go and work with staff as necessary. So the hotline, just so that educators don't need to know every USBE employee, might be the smoothest way.
So I see that the superintendent's here with her hand up, but I wonder if, as we're talking about this, if that might be a good thing to add to our disclaimer, to just have if you feel there's anything inappropriate about what's here, you can contact whatever route we decide is the right complaint process. But that's just a thought. Go ahead, Superintendent, please.
Thank you, Chair Hansen. And you may have just answered my question. It was for Board Member Earl in trying to think ahead of what kind of concerns and complaints. Would it be about the content, being a part of the listserv, which they can opt out of, or are you seeing just sort of a broad array of concerns? Are there some specific—
Yeah, and it may not even be concerns, quite honestly. It may be a question about the resource, right? What book did you get? Maybe there wasn't something clear. So it's not necessarily always a complaint process. I refer to it as that. It could be this resource wasn't referenced all the way, a question on it. So I do think the disclaimer element, if there's a contact person, and a listserv should be easy to figure out who the contact person is for that listserv, right? Or the backup person for that, just so that there's clarification if there is a question or a complaint. It could be a complaint, but it doesn't have to be that either. So.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would think that in general, we'd want our process to be that if there's an issue or a question, that it be addressed to the person who's responsible for the email or the listserv that came out. If things can be resolved at that level, then great. That's the best way to do it efficiently and quickly. If it doesn't get resolved there, then we should have a more formal process where, if something that someone feels is clearly inappropriate gets put out, they might want to have, a hotline or somewhere where they can say, hey, the system didn't work. We don't think it worked, so we need somebody to take a look at it. And that the more formal process, that's where we would start to be able to collect some information about whether there were a number of different problems in the same area or something like that. But I don't think we want everything to go through a formal complaint process. That's my personal opinion. I think that there should be that ability to work it out one-on-one. And so the listserv owner is clear, right? Everyone knows who is responsible for those emails that are coming out.
Yeah, so it'll have the staff email, if you hit reply, it'll go straight back to the staff member that sent it.
So maybe as we look at these disclaimers, we can maybe put a little 2-line, if you have questions about the content of this email, please contact, or, by reply email. And if you have further complaints or whatever, you can contact the hotline if that's the route we want to go. I think that would be good. And Jenny, I know you've got 5 questions, so we've got 4 left.
And maybe a couple of them are just comments. Just the UEN, when we send something up there, they don't have a vetting process. When I've called on things, they don't have a vetting process unless it's taken before their full board and that. So when we send something up, we've got to have the professional ability to say this is the most correct of whatever. I'm just that's maybe an FYI. So they don't vet that. They rely on us to vet it if it comes from us. So it's important that we vet it appropriately. And then just the last thing, well, I guess 2 things, and we're learning this about web pages, right? When you send someone to a web page, then they can go from that web page to another web. Do you know what I mean? So just really being cautious about that. That happens with everyone. You know, I may send something to my kids in a text and they click on it, but then there's access to other information on there. So it's just really being, and it sounds like that's what we're doing. And the last thing is we're a professional organization, and it sounds like we're just tidying things up so that when people get things from us, they have no doubt that this is a professional organization. We do things, we have a process, we understand how to do it, and that we're about the people's business, right? Educating children to the best we can and providing the best resources we can. So that professionalism plays out in this arena. And I so appreciate this document because it clarifies and clears things up for all of us so that we have a clear understanding. There's not this ambiguity. But that's the end of my comments. So thank you. You guys are wonderful. Thanks for letting me talk a little bit today.
Thank you, Jenny. So the question for the committee is, so we've, I think, done a lot of good homework, and we've got some direction. I think this disclaimer is one part that may be still open. How do we want to move forward? This isn't necessarily a rule or anything that has to be approved by the board. I think that when we believe this is in the right format and is complete, that we should forward it on to the board, if just for information, that everyone should have this, not just the Standards and Assessment Committee. So as a committee, any suggestions about how to move forward, or motions, requests to staff about how we move forward from where we are now? I think we're getting close to a finished product here. We just have to decide what needs to be done, if anything more, and then what do we do going forward. Jenny, hand up again here.
Yeah, I don't know that it needs thorough, like an approval. Most of these things already are in law or have approval process, but I do think it's good to bring it forward if there's additional recommendations, right? There may be just a couple of things we haven't thought about. I think if people go back and listen to this, we've been pretty thorough, but I think there is the ability to open it up for any other consideration, I think would be, would be appropriate.
Let me ask staff, what if we were to handle this the same way we handle like a standards vetting process, or the process that we just looked at today, and move forward to the board? Would that be appropriate? That's kind of what we're doing, is we're showing how things are vetted and the process going forward. Is that the model that we should use to get this in front of the board, or what are your thoughts?
So I'm not clear on what that means. So I'm trying to think of what that looks like in a motion. Hold on, I got grandkids running around. Ignore it, they're happy. Something about the committee recommends that staff continue this process and bring it forward as new, something about that. Would that be helpful? I'm not sure what it looks like as an action item.
Well, we approve the process for standards, right? It's not a rule, or it's just a process. I wonder if that's the same model we ought to do, is the committee approves this vetting process for information that is generated by staff, and then have the board give their stamp of approval as well. I'm just thinking out loud. We've done a lot of good work, and we just need to decide how to button this up now. Laura, please.
I just think that we could forward this as an information item, and then when you give it out as a report, you would just say, you might want to take time to look at this, because it isn't an action item. It is fully information for us to use.
Okay, Jenny?
My only thought is there additional information that someone might want to add? And if so, how do we want to, I don't know, and maybe not, maybe it's adequate the way it is. That's my only thought on that, if we could get it out that way.
Okay, Laura, did I cut you off? You still got your hand up.
Oh, no, you didn't. I just didn't take my hand down. Okay, sorry.
Sounds good. Brent, please.
Yeah, I'm just thinking back on how we arrived at this point. Why did we need to do this? Why did we develop these processes? And it goes back to we've had some issues and some challenges that have come from it, where some members of the board have felt that they were made responsible for something that they weren't responsible for, and that we needed to get control of this, and the information that was sent out from staff. And so, you know, for me, now if someone calls me and is complaining about something that comes out, for example, I received emails about material that came out around January 6th and the events of that day. And, you know, now we know how it works. Now we know that, well, I'll contact and we'll work through this. But, you know, nonetheless, at least I know what the process is now. And I think that's probably what it is for most board members is we've improved the processes. We now handle information and the approval and how those materials are approved. And I think we're in a better place. So I think it's just information for the board.
Okay, Janet, please.
Yeah, I was just going to say it is listed as an act on our committee agenda. So if we can take action to change it to an information item, I imagine that maybe we could, but I think it would be worthwhile to have the full board aware of the updated processes for recommended resources, and give them an opportunity to see the work that staff has done.
Okay, there's a motion that Patty started for us. The committee recommends that this item be forwarded as an action item or as an information item to the full board. Does that sound appropriate? Does that match what you were thinking, Laura, as far as a way to get this in front of the board?
It actually does, but I also think Jenny has that concern if they have different pieces that they want to add or take away from what's on there or get information. But I also think that if that's in there and the contact person, they could bring that up and ask us to relook at it.
Well, what if we just did this as a simple action the same way we do the standards review process? We said this is the information, the USB information flow process, and forward that to the board for approval.
I think that's okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
let's see.
I like that better.
Okay, Jennifer, you've got something to add?
If
Please.
I can share my screen one more time, there's a document that has the checklist and the disclaimer that we use in our employee handbook. And we could attach that as backup for this item. If that, as we did this today, that piece of information came up and other board members would probably be interested in that piece. And so if I can take the screen, I cannot take it. I will show you what it looks like and see if that might meet your needs so that other board members
I just gave
feel
you access to the screen.
perfect. Just so other board members feel as confident as hopefully this committee does in what the work is. So we have this teaching and learning. This is our employee handbook, but basically says the board has authority for these things as staff, what our role is and how intentional and thoughtful we have to be. And then it has the resource vetting checklist related to not core guides, but just in general. And then on the next page, and this is the part we already went through, is that disclosure statement at the bottom. So if that's helpful, we could attach that as backup just to kind of go with the item so that the other board members have the same information you have, as this is not currently in backup.
I think that sounds great. The only thing I think that we discussed that wouldn't be included there was the addition of a couple of lines for a contact. If you have questions about this information, please contact here. And if your questions aren't addressed to your satisfaction, contact the helpline, I guess. So maybe we could add, oh, Jennifer, you're muted. I see you talking.
Sorry, I did add a couple lines that we could potentially add to that disclosure statement that just at the end says, if you have questions or concerns about this email, please contact the sender of this email. If your question or concern isn't adequately addressed, you can contact, and we would hyperlink the USB hotline as an option. If that works, we can definitely add that into this backup, and then I can send that on.
That sounds great from my perspective. Jenny, are you ready to make a motion?
Well, I guess we could do information, but then we can't do, are we saying that if we do that, that we could still do action on it, meaning that someone could make a recommendation? Because I'm just thinking if we put it out as an action item and then we just say something like for additional recommendations of the full board, for any additional recommendations of the full board. I don't think
put the motion back up. This is
we're
just
talking two different things.
Yeah. So this part is just in addition to the disclaimer that would go on the emails.
I wasn't referring to that. I was referring to the motion.
Okay, let's get that motion back up and let's see if we can craft a motion. And I really, I think we've done some good work and we're okay. I'm looking at the time. I don't want this one to move to another month. I'd like to move this one forward.
Yeah, so something like the committee recommends that this item be forwarded as an action item to the full board for any additional recommendations from board members.
So, yeah, forwarded to the full board for approval. Yeah. And if it goes just to the board for approval, then they can make whatever amendments or changes they want to make to it or requests. So I don't know, Laura, you've got your hand up again.
I do. I think we have way too much. I think I'd like to make a motion, please.
Okay, let's get Patty typing while you're making the motion.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion that committee recommends that this item, be forwarded to the full board for approval. Then it is an action item for them to do what they want.
I like that. Does that suit our purposes, committee?
And I think we shouldn't call it this item, that this chart
the resource vetting.
Yes.
Resource vetting process.
Be forwarded to full board for approval. And then we should probably take a vote that it was so that they know what we did.
Yeah, no, we're going to vote on it right now. That's why we're.
Thank you, Chair.
Forward. Thank you. Jennifer, any last words? With your hand up there. Okay. All right. We do have a motion before the board or before the committee. The committee recommends that the resource vetting process be forwarded to the full, as amended today, be forwarded to the full board for approval. Committee members, please vote. And we are unanimous in moving that forward. Appreciate all the good work from staff. I think this one, for various reasons, is drug out over a period of time, but I think it's been good for all of us to think about how information moves from USB out into the field. So thank you. And thank you everyone for hanging with us on a Friday afternoon. I don't know about where you are, but I don't have the AC on yet and it's getting pretty sticky here. I got to get this tie off. So hope you all have a good one. Laura, you still got your hand up.
I did. I re-put it up. So Chair, I just would like to ask that moving forward that maybe we consider bringing back all of the requirements we have for documents. I can't remember the exact term here. I'm sorry. That we are supposed to be checking through, not only for the legislature, but for us, all the required documentation that we expect LEAs to do. We haven't seen that again, and we're about another year into it.
Yeah, and that still is on our list. So thank you. We will.
Thank you.
We'll move that forward. I know we got into a little bit of a competition with the audit committee on what need to be done. And I think that's cleared up now. We can move it forward. So thank you. Appreciate the reminder.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay, we will knock off then. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Chair Scott. Thanks, committee. Thanks, staff.
Thank you.
Happy weekend.
Good night. See you guys.